Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. I'm Oonagh, as said, and I'm a Programme Manager with the Health Research Board for Infrastructure, Networks and Interventions. And I'm actually delighted to be here today to talk about opportunities for definitive intervention and feasibility studies, but I'm going to simply refer to them as DIFA from now on for ease. So my goal in putting this discussion together today, okay, just move that, that's fine. So my goal in putting these slides together today was really to provide you with enough information and guidance to help you start your next application for the next DIFA call. But of course, between now and the next round of DIFA, there will be some slight changes to the call. So please bear that in mind. This is really, the information here is based on DIFA 2017 call. So briefly, to give you an overview of what I'll talk to you today. I'll talk to you today about the DIFA scheme and where it fits within the Health Research Board and our new strategy. And then I'll talk to you about the DIFA call, its aims and objectives, some details of the call in terms of funding, and then the next rounds of the DIFA call for you. And then I will take you through some key characteristics of the application and the peer review process, on the assumption that some of you have done peer review and applications through the HRB and others are new to this as well. And then I will talk to you about some feedback and some strong tips to create a strong application, and that's based on feedback from review of similar studies. So to give you a little bit of background to the Health Research Board, as many of you know, of the funders in Ireland, we're one of the leading funders supporting health research. We're a state agency under the Department of Health, and we have a budget in the region, annual budget from the department in the region of about 40 million per year. We have an active funding portfolio worth 100 million in active grants, and we have approximately 60 members of staff. And that staff is divided between two activities, intramural research and the extramural research. Intramural research involves providing evidence for policy and information for service planning. And the section extramural research, which many of you are more familiar with, is managed by the Research Strategy and Funding Directorate, and that's responsible for funding health research. And we fund research across three different areas: clinical, population health, and health services research. And we have quite a number of instruments and initiatives to support that, and it can range from our capacity and leadership schemes, where we're funding researchers through different stages of their career. And then we have the funded studies, such as response mode projects like the DIFA and our project grants, our applied programs, commissioned projects, and centres or units. And we've also been building a supportive environment for health research through infrastructures and networks over the year. And many of those are in the audience today and will be talking to you, so I won't go into that too much. So our new strategy, as you know, was launched in January this year, and it covers three areas of focus that the HRB will engage in over the next 4 years. Focus Area 1 addresses major health challenges, and Focus Area 2 is for the support of healthcare interventions, and Focus Area 3 addresses the research needs of the Irish health and social care system. And these are enabled by two different enablers: Enabler A for health research careers and Enabler B for a strong environment. The DIFA call falls under Focus Area 2 because you can see within this focus area, the focus primarily on supporting the design, conduct and evaluation of healthcare interventions in order to improve health outcomes, health service delivery also. And we have recently restructured ourselves into two teams to deliver this strategy. The Research Strategy and Funding Unit is now divided into a pre-award team and a post-award team. So I'm in the post-award and evaluation team, but at the beginning of the strategy, I was working with Anna Cody, who's in the audience today, on the development and design of the DIFA call. So future rounds of this call will be led out from the pre-award team, but I'm currently managing the current scheme as it is, as it will move across into the post-award and evaluation team. So that's the Health Research Board and a little bit of background on where DIFA fits. So now just to talk about DIFA itself and the scheme. Many of you who are familiar with the Health Research Board will know that we have been funding definitive interventions and feasibility studies for quite some time, but we have been doing it through our Health Research Awards, which is our project grant scheme. And as part of the new strategy, it was agreed to pull all intervention studies together and have them reviewed by one grant selection committee. So that would ensure continuity of review by clinical trial experts. So hence the exciting name DIFA we came up with. So within this slide here, this will show you a lot of the initiatives that we have under each of the focus areas. And under focus area 2, to support healthcare interventions, you will see that there's 2 initiatives, Definitive Intervention and Feasibility Awards itself, DIFA, and Clinical Trial Networks. I'm going to talk mainly on the DIFA scheme for you today, but I will just bring to your attention the clinical trial networks and the ambition to have a new call in that over the coming years as part of this strategy. For those of you that have applied to the DIFA scheme currently, I'm just going to take a pause here and let you know about the current round of the DIFA. It was opened in May of this year and closed in July, and we received 48 applications. 18 of those were definitive interventions and 38 are feasibility studies. Now they're currently under the first phase of peer review, which will explain a little bit about the peer review process later. And over the coming weeks, those applications will be shortlisted and we'll be in contact with the applicants. And as outlined in the guidance notes, quality permitting a minimum of 3 definitive interventions in addition to the feasibility studies will be supported in this round. So overall, in terms of DIFA, the scheme itself, the HRB planned to commit 18 million over the lifetime of the strategy to support healthcare interventions through this scheme. And it's planned to do that by issuing 3 rounds of the call. So the first round has already been launched. That was launched in May, and there's plans for 2 other launches, the second one in 2018 and the third one in 2020. So what is this scheme and what is the main aim of it? The scheme is designed to support studies that are aimed at evaluating a full-scale definitive intervention to provide high-quality evidence on the efficacy, effectiveness, cost and broad impact of that intervention. And to achieve a pipeline of such studies, standalone feasibility studies conducted in preparation for a future definitive intervention are also supported. And we say standalone feasibility studies just to relay the message that a feasibility study and the associated definitive intervention cannot be applied for at the same time. Reviewers have constantly fed back the desire to see evidence of your feasibility study before you go to your full intervention. And also an objective of the scheme is to support trial methodology research conducted within the context of the proposed intervention. So SWOTs, studies within a trial, we've heard of those earlier, are also welcomed within this call and within the funding envelope. So what's available in terms of cost? Well, within this round, the maximum amount available per application is up to 1 million, and that's inclusive of overheads, and that's for both the definitive interventions and the feasibility studies. But depending on the type of the study that you come in for, we do expect that the budget and award duration would vary. For example, if you're coming in for a feasibility that's a non-pilot study, we do expect that the duration should be shorter and that the budget should be significantly lower. And we've seen that come in through the DIFA currently. So all types of interventions are eligible through the round. We're really looking for any method that will lead to improvement in people's health, patients' care, new ways of treating people, delivering care, or changing behaviours. So we've listed a few examples of interventions and they've been highlighted in the calls, and we're seeing actually quite a number of behavioural interventions coming through in the current DIFA round. So who should apply? The team is open to applicant teams with the necessary breadth and depth of expertise to deliver the research. There'll always be a lead applicant, and that lead applicant must fulfill the usual requirements of a HRB principal investigator, and that is someone who holds a post in a recognised HRB host institution. So I'm just going to draw your attention to that. If your host institution is not one of the 16 HRB currently approved host institutions, we would recommend that you talk to your host institution at the moment and start them working with the HRB on that application process, because it can actually take quite a while to go through that process depending on the number of questions that need to be asked. And it's more important for you that you know that in order to be eligible, your host institution must be a HRB approved host institution for at least 2 calendar months before the end of the closing date of your call that you're interested in. So then back to you as an individual, in terms of track record, we look for 3 publications or expertise in conducting trials, at least 1 peer review grant, so travel grants or small bursaries wouldn't be considered in this regard, and evidence of managing and supervising research teams. So the expertise of your research team, as we will hear further on, is part of the assessment criteria. So it really is important that you pull the right team together to deliver this research. And if you don't have the expertise on board through your team, you can get them on board as collaborators or co-applicants. And we've set numbers up to a maximum of 5 co-applicants and up to 10 collaborators. Now, those numbers might change in the next call if people found them too restrictive. But what is a co-applicant? A co-applicant is somebody that has a well-defined and critical contribution to your project. And a collaborator is somebody as an individual or an organization that can provide you with an integral but yet discrete contribution to your project. And we see a lot of different teams coming in and a lot of different people on board. For example, typical teams can involve health scientists, clinicians, health economists, biostatisticians, behavioral scientists, just to name just a few people that come in together. And also, supports are available outside of co-applicants and collaborators in terms of research infrastructure. As I stated earlier, the HRB have invested quite a lot over the past decade in building a strong and enabling environment for clinical research. So there are a number of infrastructures that we do expect you to collaborate with and to work with. In terms of, we have HRB clinical research facilities, or there's clinical research centres within institutions. We have HRB Clinical Research Coordination Ireland if you're conducting multi-site trials. We have HRB Trial Methodology Research Network for complex methodological questions, and one of the HRB thematic clinical trial networks to connect in with. Now, under the DIFA scheme, we are aware that there's 2 different types of studies within that. There's feasibility studies and definitive interventions. So sometimes it may not be appropriate to link in with these, but I mean, as long as you justify that and state that within your application, that's fine. It's just that with such an investment and such supports available, it would be expected that you'd link in some fashion. So before I move on from that, I just wanted to bring you back to another opportunity for DIFA, and that is potentially through Clinical Trials Network application. And there is a call under consideration at the moment with the hope to launch it in 2018. So I'm just going to reverse back to what the previous CTN call was as a reminder. The previous CTN call was for 4 new clinical trial networks to conduct multi-centre clinical trials in targeted areas of health as dictated by the applicants for a period of up to 5 years, with 2.5 million contributed for a combination of network activities and trial activities. And the HRB have existing clinical trial networks now in 5 areas: stroke, critical care, mother and baby, primary care, and Cancer Trials Ireland, which is formerly known as ICORG. But a lot of you are in the audience today and we'll be talking about your supports later. So just to recap on the overarching aim of the DIFA scheme is to achieve tangible benefits to patients, people health and health services through the support of studies aimed at evaluating a full-scale definitive intervention of any appropriate design to provide high-quality evidence on the efficacy, effectiveness, cost and broad impact of that intervention. So now that I've brought you through what the scheme is, its aims and objectives, I just want to reflect a little bit on the actual application and the peer review process that is involved in that. So the application process itself surprisingly can take between 8 to 10 months to complete. The current DIFA one will take about 9 months to complete, with people being informed if they're successful in February of 2017. So hence the name DIFA 2017. The year is normally associated with when the final funding decision will be made. So the application stage is usually about 6 to 8 weeks for the HRB, but at this point, probably in terms of advice, it's saying that it's quite challenging to pull an application together within that 6 to 8 weeks. So we don't expect you to start your thinking at the point that the call is launched. So I'll probably get into that a little bit earlier. And what surprised me when I was going through this is looking at the number of deadlines that applicants actually have to reach within that 6 to 8 week period. And I actually counted 5. So to go through them is you'll have your own personal deadline of when you'll have your first draft and your second draft. And then you may also have your co-applicants' deadlines so that they can review and input your application. And should you avail of some of the infrastructure supports, whether it's 1 or 2, you're going to have their deadlines as well of when they can see your application and talk to you and see if they can take your study on board. And then you're also going to have your host institution deadline because they submit the application to us on behalf of you. And then more importantly, you're going to have the HRB deadline. So that was 5 deadlines I looked at. So timing is quite important throughout all of this. And then once your host institution submits your application, it'll go through the peer review process with us, which I'm going to talk a little bit in depthly about now. So once an application comes into the Health Research Board, it goes through an internal assessment by the HRB staff looking for eligibility. And during that process, we'll look at the applicant itself and we'll look at the proposal just very quickly to see if it's within scope of the call. And subject to your application being eligible, it'll move into the first phase of peer review. And that first phase of peer review will involve going out to external experts to review your application. And they will review that against set assessment criteria that you will know about within the guidance notes of the application form and that they will be informed on with specific guidance. We aim to achieve 8 reviewers per application, and we will cross-check conflict of interest with each one of those against your application. Subject to shortlisting, which will be based on the scores and the judging of those external reviewers and the funding pot that we have available, because we don't like to shortlist more than 3 times the amount of what we can fund. If you're shortlisted, this is a new step in the DIFA process. You will be given the opportunity and a right to respond to the anonymized reviewers' comments. And this has proved really positive and quite beneficial for applicants. So it's something that we encourage all people to take the opportunity to do. It's time bound, but it can really help you clarify something that the reviewers mistook or misunderstood through your application. And all shortlisted applications are then brought through to the second phase of peer review, which is a panel meeting. And that's a face-to-face meeting, usually at the HRB offices. And it's chaired by an independent reviewer, an independent meaning international as well. There will be about 8 to 12 panel members that will be there, and they'll come from a lot of different specialities. So they may not be from your speciality reviewing your application. We'll always have a lead reviewer and a secondary reviewer reviewing your applications. They will lead on the discussions and then open up the discussion thereafter to the entire panel. And once consensus is agreed, a final ranking will be applied and we will have a final funding recommendation that we can take to our HRB board for final approval and decision making. So it's quite a lengthy process. It can take about 8 to 10 months. So bear that in mind as you're going through it. And most importantly, to bring to your attention is the review criteria. So review criteria are the important criteria that reviewers from the first phase and the second phase will use to assess your application. And they can be really helpful in developing your application and bearing those assessment criteria in mind as you write it. The criteria will differ depending on the aims and the objectives of the funding scheme, but overall quality is the main feature for successful applications. There's usually about 2 or 3 criteria with a number of questions, and these are identified in the guidance notes for you. In relation to the DIFA scheme, currently the 2 assessment criteria are relevance and potential impact and scientific quality and expertise of the research team that's put together. So with those, what are the reviewers looking for? They'll look for an important research question, so therefore it needs to be apparent from even a very quick read of your application that this is an opportunity that you must take it now or else it's going to be lost. They're going to look at potential impact. Again, going back to the overarching aim of the scheme, it's to have tangible benefits to patients, people, and people working within the health services. They're going to look at scientific quality and expertise, the methodological rigor of your study. So always assume reviewers are going to look for faults and flaws. They're going to see where something may go wrong or not. So search for them yourself when you're writing your application. Ask where can it go wrong and show them. Convince them, for example, that you can identify the appropriate participants in your study, and you can recruit them and you can retain them. Research team, again, as mentioned earlier, is really important. Even if everything is perfectly worked out, unless you have the right team on board, you may not deliver your research. So make sure you have the right expertise as co-applicants, collaborators, or you have reached out to the appropriate infrastructure to have them on board. And then something I wanted to add here, it's not something that is down as an assessment criteria, but it is something we find reviewers look for, a well-presented application. Something that's easy to read and something that's clearly put together suggests attention to detail. It convinces them as well that the team is able to deliver. You hear a lot of the time panel members saying, that was a joy to read. So therefore, sometimes you can stand out from all the competition by simply having a very nice presented and easy to read application. So something that's poorly laid out or cluttered could result in something being mislaid or possibly being misunderstood. So presentation is key sometimes. So to reflect on that and to give you some very quick tips for a strong application, I looked at some of the feedback in terms of where applicants have gone wrong in previous applications, and then just some quick tips. And then finally, I'll address some current debates and issues that you might bring your mind to when you're looking at a potential application. So where have people gone wrong and mistakes? They have been unable to convince the panel or the reviewers that this is an interesting or a project of clinical importance. It's the so what question. So remember, in terms of advice for this one, it's remember that people are sometimes outside your area. So what might seem really obvious to you may not be obvious to somebody else. And sometimes you do actually have to explain what usual care is. Lack of clarity is going back to the well-presented application. Easy to review makes it easier, and it convinces people about quality of detail and attention to detail. And then unconvincing scientific quality. This is an area that people fall down in a lot, but it could actually be avoided sometimes by clarity and additional information and clarity of that information to avoid reviewers second guessing what you're actually going to do. A lot of the time we hear that projects are over-ambitious, but perhaps they've been over-ambitious because people haven't convinced the panel that they can achieve it. In terms of going back to recruitment as well is one issue. Make sure that you might have a number of sites involved and signed up to ensure that you can actually reach that recruitment target. A weak design or poor methodology. A lot of the time, a simple feedback can be making sure that the sample size and the outcome measure actually tally. An insufficient team and expertise or support, an inconvincing team to deliver the project, again, and lack of evidence. Reviewers want to see that you understand the clinical problem, that you've actually looked at what else is out there, and that you're aware of studies that are going on and you know where your research is going to fit. And this ties back into the research waste question, an issue that it's been talked about earlier today. Okay, and then in terms of top tips for success, I mean, this is really hard because there's actually loads of different things that people could do. But what I wanted to bring to your attention was maybe time being the most important one. And actually, in this case, for Opportunities for DIFA, there is plenty of time. With the next launch of the call being potentially 15 months away, there is plenty of time for people to leave this room and start thinking about ideas and thinking about an application. And I have a reference later in terms of an article that I found that gives a timetable of what you can do, and it goes 12 months from the actual closing date of a call in terms of different steps to take. So that was interesting. Know your funding stream as well and seek advice. We have very detailed guidance notes within the HRB, and we feel that we guide you a lot, and these are condensed as well into webinars in terms of information. And there's always a program manager and project officer assigned to that scheme. So please feel to ring us and talk to us about the application, because actually we do want to help. We want to hear back from you about what you felt was misguiding or a little bit confusing within the guidance. So we're happy to help and talk through things. If you don't feel like contacting us, talk to friends and colleagues who have been through the process and or maybe have been successful in it also. Follow the instructions is another tip. Read the guidance notes carefully. They're quite detailed, but they actually have a lot of information that not only you are going to see, but all the reviewers are going to see as well. And we'll be guiding them in relation to the guidance notes and what we're looking for from an application. Write with your reviewers in mind. Understand that they will be looking at the assessment criteria and what they are actually looking for within your application. Make sure you have a complete literature review done, and remember that some review panels are not always experts in your area, they're experts in other areas. And again, back to the well-presented application, write clearly, avoid technical terms, abbreviations and jargon. And then also, I just wanted to flag these. I'm not going to discuss them in any detail, but sometimes there's debates and different things happening between funding agencies, to keep an eye on them, because 12 months out or 15 months out from a launch of a new call, these debates may actually be questions within your call, so pay attention to that. Public patient involvement is something that the HRB is working on quite a bit. And there will be a new call. It's under consideration at the moment and potentially going out in 2017. PPI may be part of your review for the next DIFA, so understand and read into that. Big data is a big issue. Everybody's talking about open access, open science, data linkage, data management. Familiarise yourself with that and look for questions that may come up within your application. And again, research waste that we talked about today. And this question, perhaps the funders will be looking for more proof that you're going to avoid research waste in the next call. And then also a new policy, just to draw your attention and not to get into too much detail about it now. Within the Health Research Board, we have a new policy on gender that came into effect from the 1st of June this year, which missed the current DIFA round. But potentially there will be questions in relation to gender balance within your research team, or as usual within the context of your research. So pay attention to that should it come up through the applications. And then this is the article I talked about earlier that has a little bit of a timetable of what to do at different times. Some of the information may be redundant for this particular scheme, but it was worth reading, I felt, and had some nice little quotes, such as good writing will not save bad ideas, but bad writing will kill good ones. So I'm just going to leave you with my contact details for DIFA 2017, and thank you very much for your interest.